I think naturally, and questions we usually get from clients is around the industry vertical intersection. So I mentioned we're starting with the geographic expansion of the cloud ecosystem report. Naturally, we're going to build into similar kind of data cuts within the existing other reports on the application side.
Right.
So the geo breakouts are the natural one. And then the next one will be start adding the industry vertical, understanding, okay, can we give us, the top 6, top 8 industry verticals by practice area, by partner, so essentially, again, taking, let's say, Capgemini this time with Microsoft. What are Capgemini and Microsoft top 6 or top 8 verticals?
Welcome to TBR Talks, decoding strategies and ecosystems of the globe's top tech firms, where we talk business model disruption in the broad technology ecosystem, from management consultancies to systems integrators, hyperscalers to independent software vendors, telecom operators to network and infrastructure vendors, and chip manufacturers to value-added resellers. We'll be answering some of the key intelligence questions we've heard from executives and business unit leaders among the leading professional IT services and telecom vendors. I'm Patrick Heffernan, Principal Analyst. Today we'll be talking about TBR's family of ecosystem research with Boz Christoph, Principal Analyst for TBR's Digital Transformation Practice, and Alex DeMule, Analyst for TBR's Cloud and Software Practice. Boz and Alex, great to have you guys back on the podcast.
Good to be here.
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Excellent. Yeah, so I want to talk about our ecosystem research, our ecosystem intelligence reports, which we're in year 3 now of doing these. And it's been a blend, a combination, a merging of work that we do in the cloud and software space and work that we do in the IT services and consulting space. Basically, we look at each of the companies that we cover in detail in those spaces, but now for the last few years, we've been combining those two research streams and saying, what are the relationships between these companies like, and what can we learn about the ecosystem that they're working in by understanding those relationships? And this has proved to be enormously valuable to our clients because all of them depend on their ecosystems in order to grow. And I want to wrap up when we get to the end to talk about how we see that kind of changing. But if you could maybe just walk us through right now, what are we looking at that's new in the ecosystem research? And just to say at the beginning, we do have ecosystem research around the hyperscalers. We have it around some ISVs. And so maybe you can tell us where we are now, where we're kind of, what's new, what's coming next.
Sure, happy to. So, as you mentioned, the research spans across the consultancies and the global systems integrators intersections with hyperscalers as well as the ISV community. So, the streams of reports that we've been producing in the last 3 years have been focused on the infrastructure side, as I said, and on the application side. So, the application side of the house is what we are expanding in terms of coverage. So we're about to launch our ServiceNow ecosystem report, which looks at the intersection of ServiceNow relationship with 10 of the largest GSIs and consultancies, which is a very similar report to what we have for the likes of the SAP, Oracle, and Workday, Adobe, and Salesforce on the application side, as well as the hyperscalers, the AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. So that report is a brand new one coming up shortly, and it's really just a combination of a lot of conversations we have had with both sides of the house, both technology and services providers, and looking through the lens of the role of ServiceNow as it augments its own value proposition and enhance its partner strategy along the way, technology portfolio, commercial models, sales motions, and so forth. Knowledge is happening in short matter as we are recording this podcast. So I'm sure we're going to hear more updates on ServiceNow as well as its partners from Partner Day. So that's coming up. So that's that big new report that's coming up. But we also are in the field right now with the next iteration of our Voice of the Partner report. So the Voice of the Partner, as it suggests, looks at the intersection and the relationship between 3 groups of vendors: the OEM providers, the cloud and software providers, as well as the services providers. And we're trying to answer the big questions: what are partners missing of each other? And again, we are going for the second iteration of that report that should be publishing within the next 3 to 4 weeks as well, like late May, early June.
Okay.
Essentially. Last but not least, we are adding additional data cuts. As I mentioned, we have the cloud ecosystem report that looks at the hyperscalers' relationship with the GSIs and consultancies. So that was the first set of reports that we launched 3 years ago. And now we have reached kind of a point where we have gathered enough data and we're able to model additional data essentially on our own and expand that proprietary methodology looking through the geo-specific cuts. So we're breaking down let's take, for example, Accenture's AWS revenue and headcount by geography, right? We'll do the same thing for the 3 practice areas as well as across all the 11 providers there in the report. So we're starting to add additional data cuts in that report. So ServiceNow, additional data cuts, and voice of the partner, if I have to sum it up.
Excellent. And Alex, so now we have ServiceNow, SAP, Oracle, Workday, right? And then Adobe and Salesforce. So we've got 6. In your view, coming from the cloud and software side of the house, are those the most important, and who might be coming next?
Well, the big one that's coming next for the cloud practice, and you're talking about voice of the partner, is the cloud voice of the partner. And that report that Boz started, we looked at that from the cloud practice, and just such great insights coming from, what's differentiating these vendors within the ecosystem, and how is the ecosystem looking at its peers and being opinionated about how they collaborate and with whom they're collaborating with. So we really wanted to double tap on the cloud angle around this voice of the partner report. So coming out with a dedicated cloud report in the coming months. I believe that's going to be a 2Q25 report for us, sort of towards the middle of the year. So that's something that people can expect to see in a big new report coming out of the cloud practice.
Do you anticipate within a year or so that we'll be, or less, that we'll be adding another ISV to that mix, along with Adobe and Salesforce and Workday and all the rest? Is there anybody else, I guess I'm asking, that you're like, I wish we had the ecosystem report for these guys?
There's a lot of great companies that probably should be included in these reports. I think picking one is sometimes sort of the challenge that comes to my mind. HubSpot is a fast grower. When I look at the cloud applications benchmark and their relationship to Salesforce, looking at how they compete, they're a name that could be included within the Adobe and Salesforce ecosystem report, just because I think that they're growing really well right now, and I think that their role in the market is going to continue to, be very competitive.
Right. And I could see coming at it, Boz, from the services point, you might say, here are the companies that have chosen or working with HubSpot in a very strategic way, so maybe highlighting them just from the services perspective. Alex, you said differentiation, and that always sort of is a trigger for me. When you think about how these ecosystem reports are used, is that one of the most important use cases? Is like it allows you to see not just the staffing or the dedicated resources or the acquisitions or the investments that are being made, but how you can actually tell the difference between Accenture's Azure practice and Deloitte's Azure practice. Is that what sort of comes out in these reports?
Yeah, I would say so. And one of the things, I'm always thinking about it from sort of the cloud angle, being in the cloud practice.
Right.
So, when we talk to these services vendors, like the word I just used, opinionated. And so that opinionation is going to be based in what they see as differentiation by the vendors and sort of how they are executing on their product strategy and sort of what the roadmap looks like and sort of how that is positioned in the broader cloud opportunity, whether it's, core enterprise migrations or something more emerging like AI. So, getting to the root of, how these cloud vendors are being viewed by the services professionals and how that is influencing where the services professionals are investing their money. That's really what I like to think about a lot.
Okay. And then, Boz, from your perspective, the same kind of question.
Yeah, differentiation is, like you said, it's a trigger word for sure. And I think from a services side, one question we've been trying to get a better understanding how well services providers and the cloud and software counterparts think about each other, meaning how well they know each other, I should say, probably is a better way to phrase it. Is that knowledge management and ensuring that SAP can tell the UI story as good as UI can tell their own story. So I think that's the kind of the big question that I think no one has cracked the code on that particular challenge yet. From what we're gathering sentiments and the voice of the partner surveys and just ongoing conversations. There's some bits and pieces and efforts in certain practice areas that we see some vendors being a little bit closer aligned and think ServiceNow actually, now that we're doing the research around it, we see some of the partners being better positioned themselves within each other, between each other, meaning, there's like 3 to 4 industry offerings, for example, for specific industries, right? Versus we can be ServiceNow partner across 19 industries, right? So that's kind of starts to suggest, the calibration of expectations and better alignment between the two parties, so that then when the sales process, when the go-to-market motions get fine-tuned, there's a little bit more better alignment to that, which can actually essentially service the customer, through the best way possible. But I think that's the differentiation for me, is about how well partners can tell each other's story.
We just had a conversation recently with a client that was talking about how they're trying to shift their own brand in the marketplace, and how they're trying to get more into the consulting side of things. They're trying to do higher value kind of work, which is great. And one of the things that we advised was, listen, having your partners tell that story is going to be more powerful than you trying to go out and tell your story, because not nobody, but it's harder to market, believe that we're different, as opposed to having somebody like a hyperscaler come in and say, hey, these guys are different. So I want to pivot a little bit to, what is it you don't know? Like, you guys are obviously experts, you know everything, but there's got to be stuff, there's still questions you don't know the answers to. So when you think about the ecosystem and ecosystem intelligence, and I know from a competitive intelligence perspective, we're really good at saying, these are the key intelligence questions we're going after. What are the key intelligence questions within the ecosystem intelligence space that, despite 3 years of looking at ecosystem intelligence reports, you're still going after, you're still trying to solve? Boz, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think that the biggest opportunity for everyone that I think we're trying to also untangle is around the commercial construct. An opportunity that we are starting to see being amplified and accelerated with the discussions around Gen AI. What I mean by that is, so the Gen AI focus and the push around, we can sell you, you can use the technology to increase productivity, to improve your kind of like operations, et cetera, et cetera. So that is putting a different pressure on the services vendors, meaning that now they're on the hook for delivering essentially those outcomes. So, and historically, services companies, that's what they're known for. Consultancies, they pride themselves on being able to talk about the business language, the business outcomes, and trying to be a little bit more, kind of a line of business and industry wrapper around the technology discussion. Now, the challenge that we see and we're trying to understand is, how prepared are the software and the cloud providers to change their pricing models to become more of an outcome-based focus. We don't know of any, we're not aware at least, I don't think, I've spoken to many people around in the ecosystem, any single ISV provider or cloud provider that currently is prepared to charge on outcome-based for this piece of software, right? Yeah. Now, one can argue that, this is the job of the consultancies, right? But that puts pressure on the consultancies to ensure that relationship is aligned. And we know about the consumption model. So you can say, oh, there's a consumption, they consume X, Y, and we'll get paid that way, and the outcome is driven by the consumption, et cetera, et cetera. You can kind of massage the message that way. But I think the challenge is that, the expectation is evolving. And I think that maybe it's something that it's 3 years, 5 years down the road, whatever time it takes for Gen AI to start really pick up steam in terms of making a difference on the financial side. Now it's plenty of steam on the hype side from a Gen AI perspective, but in terms of like the monetization of the technology, are there software providers out there, either current that are coming in the market space or up and coming, that are really gonna catch the Salesforce and the Workday of the world in a blind spot, where they actually will be prepared to actually come out in the public and say, we're changing the business model. We're changing the way we're going to charge. And that's going to make everyone's job different. Now that's going to create opportunities for new partnerships, because McKinsey can look around and say, we always talk about outcomes. You're selling on outcomes, your piece of software. Now we can make a job better aligned. Yeah. So I'm trying to draw some comparison to 20 plus years ago when, Salesforce and Workday came around and disrupted traditional ISV models. The big change was, the technology architecture was different from monolithic to agile, yada, yada. But actually, the big change was about how those companies started monetizing the IP, right?
Right.
And the cloud was about business model change. So this is the next wave of business model change for ISVs going to become more an outcome based. And
Right.
that's something we're trying to understand. We understand that, especially if you become publicly traded company messaging to Wall Street and
Right.
whatnot, that's a completely different, that changes
Right.
the narrative. But as this has to change. The professional services companies are gradually evolving, and they're starting to change, how they're thinking about their commercial models as well, and trying to think how much Gen AI is disrupting their business model, and
Right.
from being
Right.
time and material to more fixed price or outcome based.
Right.
So these are kind of the big questions we're trying to go after and see how the ecosystem will evolve
Right.
as the outcome based pricing model changes across
Right.
the board.
Alex, he just laid down a lot of landmines for you to kind of walk around or maybe step on. Because I think the challenge that Boz just presented was to the companies that you cover, can they actually change their business models and their commercial models? Or does it need to go the other way, that the IT services companies need to learn how to be more, I don't want to say commoditized, but learn how to sell at a subscription or
That's
retainer
the
kind of
flip
model.
side.
Yeah. So what do you think, Alex?
I mean, as far as commercialization goes, the consumption method has definitely proven to be the go-to as far as AI is concerned. There is one software vendor that is doing outcome-based pricing that I've come across. I think it was
Okay.
I think Zendesk. I think
Okay.
Zendesk is doing outcome-based pricing. I really should be double checking that.
Do they sell it directly or they sell it with partners?
I would have to double check on
Okay.
that too.
No, that's
I'll
curious.
get back
Okay.
to you.
Okay.
But it's rare. It's definitely
Yeah.
not something that
Yeah.
we're seeing broadly
Yeah.
adopted. And like one of the other things that caught my ear while Boz was talking was just this idea of what are these AI first vendors going to look at? We know that they're probably being built right now. They probably exist out there. They probably haven't risen in terms of like the spotlight that all the major incumbents still have. But at the end of the day, Salesforce, which was this massive disruptor back in its time,
Right.
is now the incumbent, and
Right.
now it's going to be the target of disruption. And getting to like bringing back to this idea of like the opinionated service provider, getting their opinion on a Salesforce is much simpler than understanding what they're looking at as far as these up and coming AI first
Right.
companies. And
Right.
so it's going to be a constant challenge for us to be intellectually agile, to hear and figure out sort of what they're looking at and being able to keep up with them, because it's not something that's necessarily being projected outward. They're much more vocal around those really large incumbent in those
Right.
partnerships.
Right.
But understanding who they are placing early bets in
Right.
these like AI native companies, that's something that's going to be challenging and an outstanding question.
So when you think, Alex, put yourself in the same seat in a year from now. What are some of the questions you think you're going to be answering then, or is it different from what you just said, and maybe even what are some of the companies, since you mentioned these sort of the up and comers, what are some of the companies that you imagine a year from now we've got in the ecosystem intelligence reports mix? They keep asking you for specific companies. I know it's not fair, but putting you on the spot.
I know it. This isn't a good example, but one that I do think is a name that everyone's familiar with. OpenAI. Satya Nadella had a podcast that was pretty widely dispersed where he said OpenAI is not a model company anymore. They are a product company.
Right.
ChatGPT is the product. ChatGPT as a product is a great product, and a lot of these model companies have done a really good job of productizing their investments already. Right. Anthropic's done a good job with it. Perplexity. There's a lot of these tools that are, were born sort of in the consumer because, it was sort of these online platforms that anyone could go access. Mm-hmm. But you look at PwC. Like PwC was one of the first companies to go out and make it an enterprise-wide tool, right, and be a reseller and a service provider, delivering ChatGPT, right, to the enterprise. Right. So, even these well-known AI model providers, those are names that now that they're turning into product companies could become more relevant to us as that goes.
And then, Boz, from your perspective, I know a year from now you could say, okay, we've got, with ServiceNow, we're looking at 10 IT services companies and consultancies. So a year from now, you could say, we're going to look at ServiceNow in 20. that's the easy answer. Give me the hard answer, which is, what are the other kinds of things you think are going to be different a year from now?
Yeah, the expansion of the partnerships, absolutely. And I think what I just started, I think it's kind of like caught my attention as well as I'm thinking about the coverage expansion is, and drawing in parallels to the way cloud first came around, right? And everyone was building cloud trained personnel.
Right.
Everyone had a big announcement. Now we're seeing everyone is training Gen AI trained data and AI practices are expanding, certain goals, yada, yada. So naturally the next evolution will be how many people you have vertically around OpenAI, around Anthropic's Claude, around Gemini, all these pieces now in your developer community, are you focused on, having model trained personnel that is part of, the joint go-to-market efforts, or
right.
it's for more your own proprietary kind of, or partner-enabled, accelerators. So that's gonna be, I think that's just a natural evolution of the discussion, because AI essentially becomes the new cloud discussion from a business layer perspective and how companies organize. So that makes perfect sense. What he's discussing, that I don't know if it's gonna be a year from now or 2 years from now, in terms of like start building out the same way we've been building out the cloud practices and the ISV practices for those SIs. But I can see that being naturally kind of the next wave of the ecosystem intelligence reports moving forward and understanding. I think that's where really the big commercial model, pricing model will come into play, of how those companies will be the key focal point discussion. In terms of the current coverage and thinking about what next, I think naturally, and questions we usually get from clients is around the industry vertical intersection. So I mentioned we're starting with the geographic expansion of the cloud ecosystem report. Naturally, we're going to build into similar kind of data cuts within the existing other reports within that on the application side. Right. So the geo breakouts are the natural one. And then the next one will be start adding the industry vertical, understanding, okay, can we give us, the top 6, top 8 industry verticals by practice area, by partner, so essentially, again, taking, let's say, Capgemini this time with Microsoft. What are Capgemini and Microsoft top 6 or top 8 verticals? Right. And obviously the bundle of all will be like another intersection of industry by geo, but that's something that we could do. It just takes so much more of the research but it's certainly, it's on the roadmap, the internal roadmaps, but it's certainly something that, just got to take a little more time.
So let me paint a picture that's going to be either wildly optimistic or just insane, and both. So right now, if you took all 200 companies that TBR covers and just put them in a big matrix, we can fill in a lot of those squares, like the relationship between Microsoft and Deloitte, the relationship between KPMG and SAP. We can fill those boxes in with data, with analysis. What we have now, we're now expanding to say, let's look at that by geo, let's look at that by service line. Okay, that's a 2x2 where you're filling in all those boxes. Now let's take the next step and say, what about multi-party alliances? Let's put together the SAP, EY, and Infosys relationship. How does that look? Can you imagine how soon are we going to be able to say, here's the 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional view of the ecosystem?
I think it's it's certainly in the near future, right? But I think a starting point before that, prerequisite, as you said it, make me think about another set of conversations we've been having about the expansion of the portfolios around workloads. So I think this is kind of where we start thinking about the multi-party alliances and understanding, take for example, Microsoft Stack, right? Microsoft Azure, and understanding what's the composition of workloads, SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, whatever ISV, you can just put, and then start then thinking about from that, and then cut across, or put across, I should say, vertically, because it's a stack, on a GSI. Right. Okay. So then start thinking through that angle. So that's the understanding the workload distribution across hyperscalers. I think because hyperscale is essentially the backbone of all this work, right? Yeah. So you need to start from there and then really understand how it stacks up, and then understand which are the channel partners that drive the most of that workload from the GSI and the consulting perspective.
Yeah. Okay.
So this
that makes a lot of sense. So we'd be looking at the multi-party alliances, not by which of the companies are forming together to solve a particular problem, but saying this particular problem exists as addressed by this workload. So within I keep drawing, as though people could see this. I'm like using my hands.
We're drawing, yes.
But in that stack of this particular workload, different percentages of that work is being driven by different companies, and how those pieces all fit together determine like what that multi-party ecosystem
and the biggest question will be are those workloads being driven by the hyperscaler directly, direct sales of hyperscaler, or a GSI
by somebody else, right?
That's or the direct sale of the ISV provider. So who actually is the leading, who's the orchestrator, who's the management, and that's
and then there's the companies coming in underneath and saying, you're doing this inefficiently, here's where we can, provide FinOps and make it work better for you. So there's that too.
That too, plus there's one more group of vendors that we have not, I touched upon the voice of the partner is the OEM providers. The infrastructure providers, they're as critical as the hyperscaler and everybody else in the ecosystem, right? So we need to account for their implications. I know sometimes, oh yeah, it's an infrastructure provider, it's a kind of a given, right? No, they also do look through that workload, especially when you take the AI discussion we just had a moment ago and thinking about the workloads on-prem versus in the cloud, right? How do they then think about their partners and who actually thinks about through that lens as well? Because that adds another dimension in the ecosystem reports. Alex,
it sounds like it's a lot more work for you, is what it sounds like. So you're coming at it from the workloads. That's your space.
Right. Yeah, I mean, where the workloads are going, that's something that we spend a lot of time, especially in our customer research, and trying to understand. We had this big wave of cloud repatriation, which I look at, how you can take costs out of your IT procurement, and whether that is something that is going to be a long-term headwind to cloud growth. We tend to be of the mind that the cloud is still the final destination for a lot of these workloads. But when you bring in AI and you start talking about latency requirements and security requirements, it definitely shakes up the puzzle. And there's definitely gives and takes, and it's going to be probably determined around, the specific use cases that the customer is focusing on. When we talk about like a manufacturing or a healthcare where there's more OT angles, and latency becomes mission critical, then we think more about on-premise AI deployment. But I still think that with how much data and the innovation that people get access to when they deploy in the cloud, there's still going to be a large chunk of the pie that ends up there.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that repatriation story was kind of a spike early on with Gen AI when there was the excitement over what it could do was met by the bill that came with it. And then it's like, well, so what can we repatriate? Awesome discussion. This was really good. We covered a ton of ground. I'm really glad we've got these reports coming out in the near term. And what I think we should do is in season 4 of the podcast, we'll sit down again, because by then you'll have the voice of the partner reports out. We'll have the latest ecosystem reports out, and we will have had feedback from our clients on what really resonated and what kind of questions they had after that. So let's plan on chatting again. Boz, Alex, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next week, I'll be speaking with Boz Christoph and Kelly Lashiska about Big Four firm EY's People Advisory Services. Don't forget to send us your key intelligence questions on business strategy, ecosystems, and management consulting through the form in the show notes below. Visit tbri.com to learn how we help tech companies large and small answer these questions with the research, data, and analysis my guests bring to this conversation every week. Once again, I'm your host, Patrick Heffernan, Principal Analyst at TBR. Thanks for joining us, and see you next week.